Welcome to the Craft of Coaching podcast, where we dive into what it truly takes to become a skilled, confident life coach. I'm your host, Kate, head of the CLCC or Credentialed Life Coach Collective, an ICF accredited Level 1 coach training program. We combine courage, coaching, and community to offer you more than just a training program, but a life-changing experience where you use your own personal transformation as the learning ground for supporting your clients. On this podcast, we explore how you can use coaching skills to support your clients or expand your own growth, all grounded in evidence-based coaching practices. Learn more about our program and get free resources for becoming a life coach at teamclcc.com. And now, here's today's episode. All right, probably got a lot of perfectionists, self-identified perfectionists who listen to this podcast. It's a lot of people. And perfectionism can look a lot of different ways. It can look like hypervigilance around trying to always do it right. It can look like trying to outwork, outperform, always be overqualified, basically overreach into like another tier of excellence. It can be, I'm trying never to make a mistake that anybody else sees while quietly tracking all the mistakes that I make. It can look so many ways. And I myself, Kate, hi, I'm a perfectionist. And I'm guessing that there are a lot of people who identify as such. And so in today's episode, I'm going to talk about how to truly start embracing imperfection, because one of the ways that perfectionism often will show up for coaches is a feeling that you have to do it perfect in a session for your clients to get results. And that is just patently not true. First of all, you ain't perfect because no one is. Second of all, one of the ways that we all unconsciously collude with perfectionism is by continuing to try to keep the vehicle of it going through doing it all perfectly. So today's episode is really for the coach or the person curious about coaching who knows that they've got that perfectionistic voice at play, who states, at least consciously, hey, I don't want to do this perfectionism thing. We're not about perfect. It's okay to be imperfect. But then, without meaning to, they still internally hold themselves to standards of perfectionism with their clients. And there's a way in which I realized that I was colluding in that way as leader of the CLCC program. And so it was a couple years into the program, and I noticed as director of the program, I would feel a kind of tension around trying to make sure that every single person in the program was always having exactly the experience that they wanted to have. This despite, of course, the logic that when you have many people in any kind of a group, they all have different needs. They all have different expectations. They all are going to want different things, perhaps at different times. And some people are going to want some things that other people are not going to want at all. And I was, of course, talking the talk of let's release this hold that we have on being perfect. Yet somewhere subconsciously, a couple layers down, I wasn't fully letting go. And we would hear and discuss these sorts of things. I noticed it within the leadership team as well. We have a leadership team in the CLCC program. We maintain a ratio of at least one teacher per 10 students, which is a great, student to teacher ratio. So we totally have that handled, and we rotate our teachers because we don't want anybody to be like we've heard of these programs where you get like assigned a teacher at the beginning of the program, and then that's the only person that you learn from. We want you to learn from different people, different facilitators. We want you to see different coaching styles. And internally, our leadership team would have these conversations about how the program was going, things we needed to do for the program, what's on the agenda, what are the trainees going through, and I would check in with everybody about what their experiences were. And perfectionism would come up. People would sometimes worry that they weren't supporting a trainee enough, not because there was any actual evidence that they weren't supporting people enough, but because there was just some kind of perfectionistic standard that was running beneath the surface unconsciously and driving them to constantly self-evaluate. Like, am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? Did I support that person in the right way? And we would have all these supportive conversations as a team about that. And then that got me to thinking about, wait a second, what are we actually practicing here? So this is a moment for you to just pause and reflect. You as a coach, if you already are taking on clients, is there a part of you that thinks that you gotta do it perfectly? Do you get off of your calls afterwards and think, oh gosh, I said this thing, or I should have asked a question about this or that? And if you've been thinking about becoming a coach, but you're hesitating about it, is there a part of you that hesitates about it because you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I could handle it if I had a disastrous session where no progress was made? If you've ever felt like you were in one of those camps, today's episode is for you. Absolutely. And just generally, if you want to start releasing perfectionism, I'm going to be talking about how we do that in the CLCC program and how we live what we teach, even though it is really hard. And this to me is profound because there's a lot of self-help platitudes that are out there that we all say we agree with. Be compassionate to yourself. But then how many people beat themselves up later and don't give themselves compassion? It's okay. Take it slow. You don't have to rush. You don't have to hustle. And then how many of us find ourselves rushing, hustling anyway? I don't need to be a people pleaser. It's all right if this person isn't happy with what I did or said. And then we find ourselves people pleasing again. Today's episode is really about how do we align what we believe with what we actually do. So, getting into it. Here is one of the first things that we flipped in the CLCC program, and it is something that you could technically implement into working with clients. This is something that we actually say to every single cohort of CLCC trainees on the very first day of training. We say welcome. We give everybody a syllabus. We go over schedules. We do all those things, right? But one of the first things that we also say is this: we are imperfect. And we mean it. We lead with that. We lead with this acknowledgement that we are imperfect because we understand no one is perfect. That's just being human. So more specifically, we lead with it because of what we've seen happen when leaders, when teachers, when coaches who go out into the world and start blowing up their businesses, program directors, anyone really in a position of authority or someone who has role power, we've seen what happens when leaders don't say, hey, we're imperfect. Because when leaders don't name their own imperfection, something fills that silence. And what fills it almost universally is projection. People come into programs with hope, which is good. Hope is appropriate. But underneath the hope is often something more fragile, like an unconscious assumption that the people leading the program have it all figured out. That if you just follow closely enough, you stay engaged enough, you do it right enough, some of that leader's apparent wholeness will transfer to you. And there's a term for this in relational psychology. It's called assumed role power. It's this automatic, often unconscious conferral of authority and competence to whomever might occupy a leadership position. And it happens without anyone intending it. Meaning, if you are taking on clients right now, your clients are probably assuming role power to you as the coach, even if nobody is actually saying that. Even if you have made statements like, hey, you're the client, you're the one in the driver's seat. I collaborate with you. This is coaching is client-led. Even if no one is stating it or intending it, assumed role power is automatic, unconscious conferral of authority and competence to the leader. And whenever I hear about one of these online groups where everything has blown up, there's a lot that's happening in news right now about, we're finding out that people are part of a certain set of files. We're finding out that certain people who we never would have thought would have anything to do with certain people in the files, health pundits and stuff like that. Turns out like they can do some inappropriate things or totally morally wrong things. There's a lot of that out there. And I've certainly heard of programs as well before where leaders do things that are beyond the files. Just in the coaching world, leaders do things that are really out of integrity. They take people's money and then they don't finish teaching a class that's supposed to have 6 or 7 or 8 parts to it. They'll like stop after part 4 and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Something's come up in my life and I'm not able to finish out the course, but I'll give you like this PDF booklet that's almost the same as if you had gotten the live training." And it's like, that's not what people contracted for here. I've heard of coaches who, get all your money up front and then don't actually show for the sessions. They ghost, they constantly reschedule. These are things that are not cool. And it can lead people who projected that you've got it all together feeling onto that leader. It can lead those who were the follower or the participant in the program or the person in the client role to feel a deep sense of betrayal. And it really impacts trust. So it's important for us to think about this from an ethical perspective, not just from a place of what I'm going to get into today, talking about embracing imperfection, but it's also about ethics. It's about, hey, what's the part that we all can sometimes play if we make an assumption or place a leader, consciously or otherwise, on a pedestal? Now, that's just one piece of the equation. And what I'm going to be talking about today is actually not times where a leader is completely misaligned with integrity and does not actually fulfill the thing that they contracted to fulfill, or a time when a leader literally abuses power. I'm going to talk about situations where people disappoint each other, where it feels hard, where you might have held an expectation that somebody is a certain kind of person, and then you realize, oh, they're human too. Human in a way that's not abusive. Human in a way that is just human. Because the reality is that sometimes when people do these projections and then feel disappointment, it doesn't just feel like a disappointment. It feels like a rupture. It feels like something that you believed in turned out not to be real. And in CLCC, we'd rather skip that entire cycle entirely. So we start with the truth. You as a coach might want to consider where you could do that. Doesn't need to go on your sales pages. Doesn't need to go in your contract where you actually say, hey, I want to name something here that happens often. This role power differential that gets assumed, that gets projected. I don't buy into that. I'm not perfect. There will be times where we're going to have to collaborate on a solution. So essentially, we are imperfect. We at CLCC will disappoint you at some point. Not because we don't care. We care enormously, but because that's what humans do. And this really matters in coaching because, again, the coaching world has a guru problem. And you know what I mean. The girl boss and slay 6 figures model of coaching that's essentially built on the premise that the coach pushing that narrative has cracked some code that the client hasn't. And the client's job is to absorb the coach's superior wisdom until enough of it sticks. And the whole architecture of those coach-client relationships or programs is about the leader's authority, the leader's brand, the leader's results. And the follower's job is to aspire. And the problem, particularly, I think, in group-based programs is that is not coaching. That is influence-based performance with a little coaching veneer on top. Real coaching is not about the coach having it all together. You actually do your clients a disservice if you pretend that you do. Our clients need and deserve to know that their coaches are also human. Real coaching is about the coach being skilled enough, self-aware enough, and honest enough to hold space for someone else's process. And there's a way in which the coach performing as having it all together, as able to coach perfectly. Here's my system to always make sure your clients see results. That whole track, I think really starts to create an image of what the client should become that is centered on the coach. And how is that a success? And you as a coach cannot do the truest client-led coaching that you want to do if you are still performing perfection. The moment a client brings you something messy that you haven't resolved in your own life, something that doesn't fit the tidy narrative, the moment a client is resistant, a coach who is wedded to their own image of having it all together will at some level feel threatened by it. And that threat will shape the coaching, whether they're aware of it or not. And that threat, unfortunately, I think leads to what I have always called this really dehumanizing practice of labeling resistant clients or clients in the middle of fear and self-doubt as, quote, uncoachable. I mean, how convenient. Coach is coaching someone, client starts to get afraid, they're resistant, they're hesitating to take action. That's an uncoachable client. You should, quote unquote, fire that client. No. In CLCC, we teach our coaches, no, you don't do that. I mean, first of all, put yourself in the client's shoes. You're a human being. You get afraid. You have a lot of self-doubt. You know what you want to do, but it's hard to take action. And then your coach says to you, hey, yeah, you're fired. You're uncoachable. That doesn't feel very good. It also doesn't feel very good to be left in the midst of that self-doubt and not really having anyone help you. You know, these times when coaching turns to tough love and things like that. Or let's just give you this mental model where your thoughts create your feelings, create your actions, create your reality, create your results, create your life, and it's all sparkly and no attention to how is this person functioning, not just cognitively, but also somatically? How are they functioning relationally? What can they lean on if just simply a cognitive reframe is not getting the job of helping them to feel capable and resilient? What else can we resource here? Naming imperfection, genuinely, not as false modesty, is how coaches stay honest, and it's how they stay curious, and it's how they stay in service of the client rather than in service of their own brand. And in CLCC, we train this from day one, and that's not as a concept, that's as a practice. It's as a practice, and it's also as a protocol that we literally build into our trainee manual. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a moment. I also want to share a little bit about the importance of being able to navigate conflict in a community based on some community thinkers that I enormously admire and would highly recommend you follow their work, because I certainly am not alone in thinking about imperfection this way in a community context. And I would definitely say that these are people that if you're going, I want to really learn more about how we navigate these situations, these are resources I'd direct you to. So one is Adrienne Maree Brown. Adrienne is spelled Adrienne. Maree is spelled Maree. And Brown is spelled the usual way. She's a writer, facilitator, author of the book We Will Not Cancel Us. She's actually the author of multiple other books, all of which I love and recommend. But in We Will Not Cancel Us, Brown writes directly about what happens in community spaces when people make mistakes and how communities respond. And the argument is essentially that accountability and belonging are not opposites, and that a community's capacity to hold imperfection rather than eject it is what makes it real. So it's worth reading if you work in any kind of community or group context. And if you think about it, isn't that what you really want? The ability to be in a community, to be imperfect, and there's some kind of a container in place that can hold it and process through it rather than eject it. And that community model of experiencing that, how do you translate that to your personal experience of the world? How great it would be for you, for me, for all of us, for your clients to be able to hold our imperfection rather than eject it or reject it or say, I don't like that or I won't accept that. Another person who I think is a great person to follow is Nike Aurea, Nikeaurea. You can follow their work on Instagram, and they speak to similar themes. The messiness of showing up in community, the way people will inevitably get it wrong, and why getting it wrong is not a reason to disengage, but rather the actual terrain of growth. And I would say both of these resources, these incredible community thinkers, are pointing at something we believe deeply in CLCC, which is that the capacity to hold imperfection in yourself and in others is not a soft skill. It's not a bonus. It's actually foundational. Now, here's the other piece we got to talk about here, because there are some people who like to twist the, hey, nobody's perfect. They like to twist it a little bit. Owning imperfection does not mean you get out of having to clean it up if something goes awry. So here's where it gets real. Saying, hey, we're imperfect, that's easy. The harder part is actually what you do when that imperfection shows up in a way that impacts somebody else, because it will. You know, in a program like ours that runs for the better part of a year, we have a cohort that gets really close. We have a community that asks people to show up genuinely. Sometimes misunderstandings happen. Somebody feels unseen. Conversation lands wrong. We've had situations in the CLCC program where, you know, someone was coached on a particular topic and the lesson call was starting to hit a time limit. We didn't have time during a coaching demo to fully unpack something that somebody was trying to explore in that session, and they felt a certain way about it afterwards and brought that to our attention. And it's like, okay, all right, let's clean that up. In a situation like that, where we are coaching someone live on a call as a learning experience, and then the call itself needs to end because it is a lesson call, and somebody's feeling like, wait a second, I have an incomplete process here. It's not that we would look at that person and go, well, you know, we are imperfect. Guess you're just going to have to deal with it. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're owning the cleanup. What is it this person is needing? What are they requesting? How do we create a container that can hold that? And so when I say that we have a conflict protocol written directly into the trainee manual, we do that not because we expect things to go wrong, but because pretending they never will is its own form of perfectionism. Building a system that can hold conflict when it arises, that's how you actually walk the talk of imperfection. You don't hope it never comes up. You prepare for it with the same care you bring to everything else. The cleanup is part of the work. And modeling that, being willing to repair, to acknowledge impact, to stay in the relationship rather than manage the optics, that is one of the most important things a coach can learn, because their clients will need to do it too. This is an important thing for you to learn. It's an important thing for you to name. I am an open space for, if you feel like a session didn't go the way you'd anticipated, let me know, because I want to collaborate on a situation with you. I want to find a solution with you. If you feel like you aren't getting the results you expected, please have an open dialogue with me about that. These are conversations that you can actually have with your clients. And I think that if you do that, not only are you releasing yourself from the grip of trying to be the perfect coach for your clients, you're also modeling for your clients that they don't have to do it perfectly, because clients sometimes feel pressure to show up as the quote unquote perfect client who always does the practices between sessions and never experiences resistance and always understands the metaphor and always is game for changing their life and never experiences times where they regress and don't want to do anything. And, you know, like, this is such an open, permission giving environment to create for someone, and what a gift that is. So here's how we've seen all of this play out since CLCC just started to lead with, like, hey, we aren't perfect. Nobody is. We're doing our best. Here's the protocol for if you notice that something doesn't feel quite right, you have a request, an unmet need, something's come up. Here's what people tell us after they complete the program. They tell us that they trust themselves with clients, not because they're perfect, but because they've stopped needing to be. They've done enough of their own work in a real community with real people that they know how to stay present when things get uncomfortable. And that is why CLCC comes from this community model, and it's so foundational to what we do. If we just show you some PowerPoints or stick you in a self-paced class where you listen to an audio and fill out a quiz at the end, like, you're not really going to get the benefit of what it's like to work in community. You got to know how to hold space for people, and part of how you learn how to hold space for people is because other community has held space for you. You got to know how to sit with a client's uncertainty because you've sat with your own. And what I think this ends up creating is that our community doesn't really end, so to speak, when the training does. People from our original graduating cohort in 2014 are still showing up to alumni calls, which I love. Coaches who trained together years ago are collaborating on podcasts. They're meeting up when they happen to be in the same city, staying in each other's lives in ways that have nothing to do with CLCC. We're not the center of it, that's for sure, and everything to do with what they have built together. And that's not an accident. That's what happens when you build something real, when you stop performing and start practicing so that the foundation of what you do is truth rather than an image. So here's the actionable strategy from everything I'm sharing today. 1, if you are considering becoming a coach, notice the places where you say you want to stop getting into the perfectionism pattern. You want to let that pattern go. You want to embrace imperfection, but then you aren't necessarily practicing it and putting it into action. Look for where it is there's a mismatch between those two things. And then look for what's a container, a community, a relationship of some kind. How can I actively practice it? Because you know you're not going to get better without practicing it. If you're already a coach taking on clients, consider your intake. Consider your initial contracts, your sales pages, all of that. Consider how you show up on social media. Do you show up from a place of embracing imperfection in a way that's responsible and ethical? Again, you can't just perform it. You can't be like, well, nobody's perfect. And then somebody's been impacted by you and you go, well, nobody's perfect. That's not at all what I'm saying. There has to be some level of accountability. And particularly if you're a coach who wants to run group programs, think about this stuff in advance, because groups come together, they form, they norm, they storm, they perform. That's the classic 4 steps for groups. And it's really interesting to notice in that process, the group forms and comes together. They norm, meaning they establish social norms. Then they storm, which means they run into conflict. And the research into successful groups has found that successful groups experience conflict. Unsuccessful groups dance around it and try to pretend it won't happen. So when you embrace conflict and create a container for it to be resolved in some way, that's actually what's going to help your group coaching program the most and create the most trust and the most rapport. At the end of the day, how to embrace imperfection is not a mindset hack. It's not a reframe you apply once and then you move on from. It's a practice that gets built over time, and it gets built through relationship, through the accumulated experience of being imperfect with other people and discovering that the connection can survive that. And that's what we're building in CLCC. And of course, if you want to spend the better part of a year doing that kind of work in a community that will stretch you and challenge you and genuinely hold you and help you to grow. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, would you help us out and take a moment to give us a rating in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening? It really helps us get the word out to other listeners. And before you go today, would you like free resources to support your coaching journey? Whether you're considering becoming a coach or you want advanced coach skills training, access our coaching resource library at teamclcc.com. Again, that's teamclcc.com. Can't wait to connect with you. And again, thanks for listening.